The use of the guillotine in France was something of a spectator sport. In France, the guillotine was like the Macy's Day Parade, a Super Bowl tailgate party, and the part in Frankenstein where the villagers chased the monster with torches and pitchforks, all rolled into one. Parisians lived for this kind of event. Today, we're going to explore what it was like during the guillotine era in France. But before we begin, subscribe to our channel Strange History. Leave a comment and tell us about the weird and unusual historical objects you'd like to hear about. Buckle up, we're heading to France. It's worth noting that while France continued to use the guillotine until the late 1970s, specifically September 10, 1977, public executions ended 38 years earlier on June 17, 1939, when Eugène Weidmann was executed. Convicted of 6 murders, Weidmann was led to the guillotine as a rowdy crowd of Parisians cheered, ate snacks, and generally had a little too much fun. One spectator even secretly filmed the execution. That was when the French government decided to put an end to public guillotine parties. After Weidmann, all guillotine executions in France took place in the privacy of prison courtyards. This solved 2 major problems for executioners. First, French prison staff had to assemble and dismantle their guillotines for each use, like overworked carnies at a county fair. Because of this, guillotines occasionally malfunctioned, broken triggers, or misaligned blades leading to messy executions. Permanent guillotines could be maintained and calibrated regularly, making the act more predictable and, yes, more efficient. The second problem was the increasingly unruly crowds. Local bars filled with spectators pre-gaming before the event. Building owners, with windows overlooking the execution sites, sold premium viewing spots. Children climbed trees, hoping to catch a glimpse. The French government and prison staff realized the guillotine had officially become a spectacle far bigger and messier, pun intended, than they had ever anticipated. How did people know about the events? Notices were posted around the city announcing the time and location. Sometimes, prisons released press statements to local newspapers with scheduling information. Other times, the timing was unannounced, and crowds simply gathered when they saw prison staff assembling a guillotine in the middle of the street. By the late 1930s, guillotine fans gained a reputation for being as rowdy as football hooligans. Prison staff resorted to assembling guillotines in the dead of night and conducting executions early in the morning, hoping to avoid the bloodthirsty crowds, but it never worked. Guillotines always drew a crowd. The guillotine itself was an imposing sight. You have to remember, this device was relatively new at the time, so it had an unusual and intimidating design. Made to be quick, clean, and humane, its angled metal blade was set high above for maximum visibility. It was a sleek yet fearsome machine, a tall, narrow wooden rectangle resembling a window frame. But instead of sliding glass panes, it held a weighted steel blade designed to deliver a clean cut. The head would fall gently into a basket filled with sawdust, which absorbed any mess. The remains were then placed in a cheap coffin. The guillotine's efficiency was as terrifying as its appearance. One of the first things you'd notice during the French Revolution was the procession of rickety wooden carts transporting prisoners to the guillotine. These carts were constantly in motion, as the guillotine, so efficient, could process 12 people every 13 minutes. Over time, the guillotine's efficiency improved, thanks in large part to the efforts of Charles-Henri Sanson, the royal executioner of France during King Louis XVI's reign. Sanson personally tested the machine on animals and corpses to perfect its functionality. The guillotine's first public test under Sanson was on Nicolas Jacques Pelletier. The precision of the blade that separated Pelletier's head from his body cemented the device's reputation. Its use spread rapidly. Witnessing French soldiers called gendarmes leading these carts loaded with convicted criminals through the city became a signal that the guillotine would soon follow. One eyewitness described the carts, the same ones used in Paris to carry wood, outfitted with 4 planks across them to serve as seats. On each plank sat 2, sometimes 3 victims, their hands tied behind their backs. The jolting of the cart caused their heads to bob up and down, an eerie rhythm that entertained the crowds. The onlookers around the guillotine weren't always rowdy. A group of women, known as the tricoteuses, knitters, would often gather, knitting and chatting as they waited for the executions. Initially, these women had participated in local government debates, but when officials barred them from public meetings, they turned to guillotine spectacles for entertainment. These women even crafted small items, like Phrygian caps, to commemorate the day's events. Despite their domestic origins, the tricoteuses developed a reputation for bloodlust and anger, reflecting the violent fervor of the French Revolution. The executioner was always the star of the show, the focal point of the crowd's attention. Whether seen as a hero or as someone to blame, the executioner held the spotlight. He was the equivalent of the point guard in a basketball game. Yet, the guillotine's hands-off approach to execution meant the executioner felt less guilt. His focus was on the machine itself, not its impact on human lives. The job involved setting up the guillotine and cleaning it after each use, a routine that distanced the act from its emotional weight. Interestingly, many Parisians felt the speed of guillotine executions stripped away the religious and social connections between death and execution, reducing the emotional impact of the spectacle. Some even criticized the guillotine for being too clinical and impersonal. At times, crowds shouted, "Bring back my wooden gallows!" Depending on the number of condemned individuals scheduled for the blade, the guillotine occasionally allowed prisoners to deliver last words. These final statements were sometimes recorded for posterity. Before his execution in 1793, King Louis XVI addressed the crowd, proclaiming, "I die innocent of all the charges laid against me. I forgive those who have caused my death, and I pray to God that the blood you are about to shed will never again fall upon France." Not everyone faced their end with such composure. Madame du Barry, a former mistress of Louis XV, pleaded with the crowd and perhaps her executioner for more time, crying, "One moment more, please, one moment." Marie Antoinette, according to some historical records, is said to have offered her final words as an apology to her executioner for stepping on his foot. The guillotine, introduced as a more efficient and supposedly humane form of execution, became a significant symbol during its time. While it aimed to minimize suffering, it nonetheless attracted large crowds curious about the events. Some executioners became known for their theatrical approach, occasionally holding up the severed heads of those executed to demonstrate the efficiency of the machine. In one notable instance, after Charlotte Cordat's execution in 1793, reports claim her head displayed a lifelike reaction when lifted. Witnesses described this moment with a mix of intrigue and discomfort, highlighting the complex emotions these events evoked. The frequent use of the guillotine brought practical challenges, including complaints from nearby residents about the aftermath of the executions. Public interest in such events occasionally extended beyond mere observation. For example, during the execution of King Louis XVI, some members of the crowd reportedly sought to collect symbolic items, such as fabric dipped in the remnants of the event. While the guillotine's design sought to modernize and streamline executions, its emotional impact on witnesses could not be ignored. French philosopher Albert Camus shared a personal account involving his father, who once attended an execution but returned deeply unsettled. Camus recounted how his father, eager to see the event, left early in the morning but came home shaken and unwell, refusing to speak of what he had witnessed, a testament to the intense and often overwhelming experience of witnessing such moments. The guillotine remains a complex historical artifact, representing both innovation and the stark realities of its era. What are your thoughts on its legacy and the reactions it evoked in those who witnessed it? Let us know and explore more stories from history's fascinating past.